Good evening, you fantastic and glorious human beings of this floating rock that we call Earth. Welcome to Off the Wire. I am your host, Noella Lynn, aka the Cajun Libertarian, and we have a very special guest for you tonight, Liberty Dad Pod, aka DL Cummings. Actually, he's DL Cummings, aka the Liberty Podcast. I'm super excited to have him on tonight because we've been Twitter friends for a long time, and somehow the two of us missed on having each other on our own shows, which is wild. So it's going to be an absolutely fun night. Thank you for showing up, all of you already. It's just climbing like crazy. So let me introduce you to whotouchedit.com. Who touched the thermostat? The best political shirts online that you can buy. The most spicy shirts. I'm wearing one now. Let me remove the graphic. There we go. Communism is demonic, and I can prove it, as I've said so many times. So go check out Who Touched the Thermostat, whotouchedit.com. That's whotouchedit.com. Exactly how you hear it. And if you're watching, which you should be, because this is a YouTube video show, and Elon has expanded our opportunity to have elongated formats on his new platform, X. Yes, you can see it. But for those of you listening, whotouchedit.com. Communism is demonic. Now, let's bring on our guest of the hour, Mr. D.L. Cummings, aka Liberty Dad Pod. My man,
Hey,
how are you?
very well. Let me just start off by saying if anybody's ever like, how come DL hasn't had me on the show? That's because DL is very terrible about getting people on the show, reaching out, working that calendar, getting people scheduled. That's it. I've apologized to more than one person because I've messed it up. They were like, "Hey, are we going? We gonna do a live stream?" And I'm like, "Oh no!" I forgot. And then I've got somebody helping me, and she's always like, that Liberty lady. She's always helping. She's like, "Dude, calendar, calendar, calendar." And I'm like, "I'm sorry."
Yeah, no,
So
I totally
I'm
get it,
terrible.
man. I've whiffed so much on guests and important guests, right? Like
Right,
people like you. How long has it been? We've been Twitter friends for years now, and neither
right,
one. I was talking to my wife about this. Neither one of us have had each other on our shows. I'm like,
right.
oh my gosh, like I whiff completely. That Liberty lady says it's true. It's like pulling teeth, getting him to use the calendar.
And if you talk to my wife, she will say the same thing. She will tell you every morning. I come downstairs. I'm like, "Yo, what you doing today?" She's like, "It is on the calendar." I'm
So
very
it's a
notorious.
consistent problem that you
It,
are
it is. It is.
consistently incorrect on.
Yes. Like there are some things that you cannot rely on me for, like scheduling, but you can rely on me to be unreliable about the scheduling. So
So anything involving a podcast that you host, we should just respectfully understand that you have no ability to keep it within the confines of normal scheduling. Is that what you're saying?
kind of, I'm getting better at being where I'm supposed to be when I'm supposed to be, and like making sure that I always have a show at 7:30 in the morning since I advertise like, hey, 7:30 in the morning. However, I like there's still a queue of people that are lined up to come on Dad Talk, which I do on Friday mornings or Friday evenings now,
Nice.
for the dads that can't make it in the morning because they've got to go to work. So I'm kind of getting there a little bit better, but one of these days, I'll be super podcast famous. I'll make all the money and I'll hire someone to do it all. So that's my goal.
Well, before we get into our topical information here, political matter, which is what this show is, for anybody that's new to this show, we're gonna do the normal thing, and we cover topical political commentary and what's going on with what not only affects the world but affects your paycheck. Um, DL,
Yes.
answer your messages, bro. Like, have those people on.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I was like, you were like, "Answer your messages," and I was like, "Did I miss something in the private chat?" I was like, "What?"
Just
Yeah,
talking
no, I
about what you're discussing.
yeah, yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood, and I was like, "Wait a minute, what? Did I miss something somewhere else? Because that would not be out of the ordinary." Actually, what I did was I bookmarked my own tweet where I said, "Hey, who's the dad who wants to be on the show?" So I
That's
could
good,
go
man.
through and start talking to these guys and get them scheduled because like it feels weird to schedule people out like weeks in advance. And then, I'm trying to
Yeah,
keep the
it's tough.
order and all this good stuff. It's just I'm getting there.
Yeah,
We'll get
yeah, yeah. That part is very, very tough. Trying to keep up with everybody that wants to come on. I can relate in a big way. I can't even keep up with the Twitter DMs
right.
of how many people want to come on. So I had to pick on you a little bit about
All
that
good.
because you and I have been Twitter friends for a long time, and
Right.
like I was telling my wife, uh, we both came to the conclusion like all of a sudden, holy smokes, how stupid are we that we haven't had each other on? So yeah, I am super grateful to have you. You're
Hmm.
a great voice for liberty. We might disagree on some things,
It
as
happens.
any normal human being can do. But I want to actually start off by exploring your your advice, I'd say, on what's happening over in New Jersey,
Okay.
right? So we have testimonial admitting that two things. One, they're in an Iranian drone ship in foreign interference, and two,
Mhm.
they have no idea what's going on.
Right.
Neither of which, in my mind, are true. So before I get into my conspiracy theories, I want to ask you, what in the world do you think's going on here? Because this is not normal. This is way outside of the realm of anything that we've even started to scratch the surface of so far. As you can dive off into Woodrow Wilson, JFK, 9/11, MK Ultra. This is outrageous.
Right.
So, what is your thought? What are your thoughts?
Honestly, I would just make it super simple and say, I think the government has some technology that they've been working on. I mean, we all know about DARPA, right? Like DARPA puts a
Right.
lot of money, and I remember being in the tech world as a budding developer before I actually became a software developer, a web developer. And I knew guys that were like, yeah, I would love to get a DARPA contract and work on stuff because what they wanted is they wanted to get paid to basically explore stuff. And so for me, I look at it and I say, sup, I'm the legacy of Jenny Kasor. Um, I think that it's just simply some new technology that the government's testing out. And I heard, and I'm trying to remember who it was. I can't remember his name, but it was a congressman, and he got on TV and he was all like, some very high up people. They told me that it's the Iranians, and they have a boat off the coast somewhere, and they
So
deployed a mothership, and the mothership is deploying these, and but I mean, he's just like making a claim. There's nothing to support it, right? Like he's not like here's a
so
photo, here's what
yeah.
they are.
So real quick,
Mhm.
I don't agree with him. Let me start off by saying that I think we absolutely know what's going on here, but he's not a congressman. He's a state legislature
Oh, state legislature.
in
Okay,
New Jersey. Yeah,
gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Yeah,
and
I
so
knew he was a government representative of some sort. I just
yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
familiar with him, so I assumed he was a Congress member. But
right. But that little detail is kind of important.
yeah, 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 absolutely. And so for me, I look at it and I say, it's probably just the government. Supposedly these things are like the size of a small car.
Yes.
And like I saw a couple videos quickly. I didn't really spend a lot of time on it, so I can't say like how big they actually are, but it does seem like People are consistently reporting that they're about the size of a small car, and that's actually pretty large, I would say. Now, as far as whether it's the Iranians or not, you know, if and I think I'm glad that you pointed out that he's a state legislator, because if just take let's just assume for a moment that he's correct. If a state legislator knows that it's Iranians, then like who else in the government knows, right? Like people in the federal government have to know. Important people, not just somebody that's working behind a screen somewhere that happened to leak it out to a state legislator. Like somebody with some authority knows about this. So I look at it and I say, well, probably not, because if it was the Iranians, I would assume that it would be a huge deal. But and I hope he comes back. But I assume that it's actually not the Iranians, that it's probably our own government testing out some technology. And what's one good way to test it out? Throw it out there, see how people respond, see how it behaves, see what information you can gather, and then you come back and you retool and you say, all right, this is what we set out to achieve. This is how well it went. Here's how many people saw it. Blah blah blah. Because that's all good information if you're going to deploy that somewhere for tactical purposes. So for me, I'm just gonna kind of land on, for right now, it's the government, it's some technology. Is it super high sophisticated? Hard to say. Um, but that it's not really much of a conspiracy theory to say it's the government. And when I say the government, I don't necessarily mean, you know, like the government probably paid some private contractors to develop it. And the private contractors are just having fun, getting paid to develop cool stuff. So that's my take. I have no proof of that, but that's where I would lean. What's
And
yours?
there's really no concrete resolution of conclusion that you can actually arrive to that suggests anything other than they're just lying,
Right.
right? So we have a track record of this over the many years. We have a track record of them saying, we don't know about thing. We may know about thing. And then 20 years later, they say, "Oh yeah, we'll release all these these uh,
Classified documents.
formerly classified documents that now we've unclassified that just confirm everything that you said was true." I'm
Right.
not saying that's the case here. I'm saying that it shouldn't be trusted whatsoever.
Right.
I would lean personally. I would lean that this is the US government using technology that may or may not be demonically influenced
Mhm.
to control a narrative to keep the US population at bay and to keep the world at bay. What do you
Sure.
think about that?
So it's possible, and a lot of times the government likes to make things secret, and everybody gets to speculate, and then the government basically denies much of everything. So I did a show a while back, remember the whole cloud seeding issue, and people were like, "Oh man, the government, they made a hurricane and you know, they sent it to Florida, they sent it here and all that stuff." And when you go back and you look at some of the, because I did a show and I went back and I actually read the transcripts from when they were in Congress and divulging the rain cloud seeding, or the cloud seeding. And it wasn't like, even by their own standards and what they were, they came out and they said, okay, this is what our objectives were. This is what we were able to accomplish. And then when they were asked, they were like, well, how well did it help you on a military sense? They were like, well, we're not really sure. Maybe we got some benefit out of it, but it's not really clear. And so, but at the time, people were suspecting, like somehow it got leaked. People were suspecting that they were controlling the weather. And then fast forward to today, now we have people that are, basically like, they created an entire hurricane and sent it over here.
Yep.
And when you go back and you look, that technology, at the time wasn't even anywhere close to being able to accomplish that. There doesn't appear, in my mind, to be much evidence that they've really made leaps and bounds on that technology. So, how does that fit today? I would say that they're probably just testing run of the mill drones. Um, it used to be that drones were like the size of a computer or the size of a small television or something like that. Like it's not very big, right? And if they're testing drones now that are the size of a car, well, then that may actually be the technology that they're working on. Because, most everybody has seen a small drone, but until now, nobody has seen a drone that was the size of a car. And if we go back to the UFO days, like most of like you would have some stories where people would describe the size, but in many cases it was like a very fuzzy picture and the size was unclear. It was unclear how far away it was. Whereas this appears to be, we appear to have much better footage of it that can at least validate that they're the size that people are claiming they are. So, I'm just, for me, I just look at it and say, based on other things that I've seen, I'm going to go with it is a drone. It's probably a large drone, and they're um, probably testing multiple things, right? How well does it fly? How well does it fly in an urban area? What kind of information can it gather? How quickly can it move when we know that it's been spotted? These kind of things. Like basically, how does it actually engage in the real world? And then,
Right.
in 10 years when we find out, I bet we're not going to find out that they had some super duper, technology that we're expecting out of, a science fiction movie. I think we're just going to be like, oh yeah, they had a really big sized, drone. Now, why would it be so big? Well, you want to carry a payload. What kind of payload? Weaponry. Maybe sophisticated photography. Maybe you want camera stuff. Maybe you want heat,
Uh,
infrared.
uh,
Any number of
okay,
things.
so let me ask you this:
Yep.
how well do you think they can pull that off?
Pull what off? Like building it?
Not just building it, but executing in the public arena, and then
Um,
people just buy the fact that we just quote unquote have no idea what this is.
um, I well, I think the government has a tendency to, how would I say it? Um, be over secretive. Like and so that over secretive, like even for things that don't matter, right? Like they're like, well, we better.
For those of you not understanding, when he says over secretive, it means criminal.
Well, what I'm
But
saying
go
is
ahead, Dale. My bad.
they classify way too much. They'll classify things that don't matter. Like they'll block out stuff,
Absolutely.
and it's like, and I think there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, it does cut down on what people can ascertain, and so that is a benefit. But then the other thing is it leads people like when if people are very good at just coming up with ideas on their own, right? Like if you let's bring this into a more personal context. If somebody is suspecting that their spouse is up to no good, their mind goes in wild places that don't even make sense, right? And they may construct this entire scenario off of this tiny shred of information that does not at all lend to that particular scenario, right? People are very, very good at just extrapolating something out of nothing. And the benefit is that people can come up with all these ideas. The government gets to easily say, no, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. And maybe they're testing something that's relatively mundane, at least compared to all the conspiracy theories. Um, and then it makes it easier, and to hide that stuff. Because if we're over here like, what if it's alien technology? Because you know what? I saw ET a few months ago in Mexico, right? Like, remember that story? And then, and then you've got all the UFO
Yep.
sightings. And so if we start thinking, well, maybe they've got extraterrestrial equipment that they're, salvaging and putting together, and they're creating some really insane, crazy technology that we don't know about. And all they're doing is they're like, so can this thing fly and carry a payload? Right? It makes it so much easier to hide all of that stuff. Because we're way over here in left field. So I think that's a benefit, whether it's intentional or not. I really can't say. But I'm just going to go with it's probably something relatively mundane, almost certainly related to military, right? Like they like virtually everything gets purposed for military reasons because we have the military industrial complex. So that would be my guess. And as to answer your question, like how well can they hide it? I mean, if you're not telling anybody about dumb things that don't really matter and don't really clue people into what's going on, then you hide it very well, actually, because people just start making up stories. They're like, I bet that's ET driving it right there.
Well, I absolutely lend your conversation, your argument
Mhm.
to my personal effect. I will say, however, that I have become very much neglectful of any information that comes from the government,
Mhm.
especially when they say that they don't know. So I'm not saying it's aliens.
Right.
I think it's actually us performing horrible psychological operations on the U.S. population. That would be my guess.
Right, and it very much could be. They could be like, "Hey, we could test this in some, you know, town that doesn't really exist, somewhere in the middle of nowhere." Like them, like when you're watching a movie and you see, like, what was it, like the Hulk, I think, where he went to like this town that was like in the middle of nowhere and had these like fake like mannequins standing up, and then they use that to kind of test their atomic bomb. Well, they could test a lot of things in a town like that where like nobody actually really exists. But if you're trying to hide stuff, in plain sight is one good way to do it. And then let people's imaginations run wild. Then you don't have to worry about them picking up on things. Because, and I tell people this all the time, I don't know if you're familiar with the term metadata, but metadata
Oh
is like
yeah,
details about something. So like if I make a phone call to you, um, the metadata would be what time did I call, right? What number did I call? How long was I on the phone for? What numbers did I call prior to that? Where was I when I called? Where were you when you answered the phone, right? Like all these details doesn't tell you anything about what we talked about. I could have called you up just to say, "Hey man, happy birthday." You know, how's it feel to be 29, or whatever. And but that metadata will tell people a lot about the conversation, even if they don't have the conversation, especially when you have an abundance of metadata. So I would say that they're probably hiding everything just to ensure that the metadata of whatever's going on doesn't get leaked because people can basically put together the pieces like it's a puzzle. So it's really mundane. It's not exciting. I'm sorry that I don't have a better conspiracy theory to offer, but that's mine. Is like they're just testing something that's probably run of the mill, and we're running with it.
yeah, but it's not run of the mill though, actually, because the vast majority of the population is not engaged in
Right.
political discourse. They're not engaged in any sort of uh, mm, dissected news that you can pull up and be like, "Look, this is where you're incredibly wrong."
Hmm.
That's a big problem for me,
Right.
in that you cannot ask the general public to just do the basic research, just the basic research
Right.
on what you can do for information. Let's just take for the Federal Reserve. Let's take that.
Okay.
How many Americans do you know that can understand fundamentally that the Federal Reserve has caused inflation from its inception?
I mean, I
How
would say
many?
outside of the libertarian community, there's probably like I can't think of any off the top of my head that I would say this person has an idea of what the Fed does or any problems related with the Fed. Or, I mean, a lot of people, I mean, the two most basic facts about the Fed is that it's like there are no reserves, and they don't have the reserves, and they're not actually a federal entity, right? Like just in the name itself, I don't think most people would recognize the uh, the issues with the Fed and its name, right? Like it's not a federal agency; it's literally its own entity outside of the federal government, and we don't have the same kind of oversight on it that we do with regular federal programs. And to be honest with you, we don't really have much, oversight on those either. I mean, we like to think we do, but the truth is, how many times have we seen a member of Congress grilling some head of an agency and get no answers? Like that happens. I mean, Rand Paul did that with Fauci like all day long, like give me answers, and you didn't get any. Right. So, I mean, it's even worse with the Fed. And I don't think that most people would recognize that.
I don't think they have the information to recognize that.
Right. Right, because nobody
And
talks
that
about it, right? Like, I mean, libertarians do, but I mean, it's not really a conversation that is common. Like people might talk about the Middle East, they might talk about, immigration, and we might even have those kind of debates around the table with our family and our friends. But when it comes to the Fed, we actually don't have those debates. Like nobody's like, man, I went to Thanksgiving and that uncle of mine was arguing how great the Fed was, and I had to set him straight. And we had this argument for like 3 hours about the Fed. Like nobody has that conversation because people aren't talking about it and they're unfamiliar with it. So,
right. So how do we fix that?
well, I think, I think the challenge is one, you have to make it important to people. If it's not important to people, they're just not going to put any effort into it. There is a lot of competition for our time every day. So, like I have one child and I have a wife, and then my mother-in-law lives with us. So when I wake up in the morning, I get up at like 5 a.m. I prepare for my podcast. I do my podcast at 7:30 to 8:30. I jump off at 8:30. I log into my company, my work laptop. I start working there. I also, while I'm preparing for my show in the morning, I'll make breakfast. I'll get, some things ready for my son. I'll wake him up at 6:30. So there's like all these things that are happening that I'm really, really focused on. Then I jump into work, and now I'm focused on work all day long. And, I take breaks to argue with people on Twitter. And then then I got to eat. I exercise at some point. I start working on,
Nice.
dinner. My son comes home. So like my time, just as a regular guy who is actually invested in this information, my time is limited. So how much more limited is it for other people? So I think the answer to how do we fix this is to simplify it and shorten it. So like give people small bits and pieces, but it's got to be in a simplified manner. And it has to be, why is this important to you? Because if it's not, like, it's important to libertarians because we tend to get into the nitty gritty details. But if you're an average everyday person, you probably are just like, why is beef so expensive? Why can't I afford eggs? Whatever, that kind of. So it has to be made important. Like the reason that your dollar isn't going as far is because the Fed printed a whole bunch of money and it devalued your dollar. And that devaluation, like your dollar was worth less probably before, when somebody, we'll kind of go with this like on a more metaphorical, but somebody hands you a dollar bill. By the time you go to spend that dollar bill, there's a good chance that it's been devalued, and this is a bit of a contrived scenario. But I think if we can get people to understand, that how that process works, um, you know, then they can
It,
start saying, "Hey, I want to learn more about this. What's going on? What's the deal here? Maybe we should audit the
it,
Fed."
it sounds like more or less that you're actually trying to advocate for just the most basic economic possible.
I mean, yeah, well, but right now we got to educate people, and we got to do it in a way that they will understand, that makes it interesting to them. So think of like a child, like a kindergarten classroom, right? A teacher's not going to walk in there to a group of kindergartners and read them a book that teenagers are reading necessarily. She's going to read like, I don't know what books they are, but something simple like, you know, Bill saw Sally. Sally said hi, right? Like they're breaking it down on their level. And then as the kids get older, then they start getting into more, heavier and heavier academic stuff. And so then eventually by the time you're at college level, hopefully, you're prepared to read, something that's, like 800 pages long, right? But we had to start with something simple. And I think basically the American public, when it comes to things like the Fed, they're kindergartners. They need kindergarten level information so that they can digest it and then they can move on to, elementary level, middle school level, so on and so forth. But I think the tendency is to talk more like high school, college level to people, but and then we don't even bring it home so that they're like, well, I don't understand what you're saying, but it sounds interesting and I want to learn more. I think that's the big mistake that we're making. And that's how we fix it. It's just to use, for lack of a better word, dumb it down.
Yeah, I agree with your overall concept. I disagree with your overall concept. Uh, uh, we
So
can't reach
which part,
people.
which part is the disagreement so that I understand better?
I don't think we can reach these people on an internet level, on a basic part of the internet level. It has to be done via some sort of construct
Hmm.
that has an actual legitimate following. And then we pursue that,
Hmm.
right? We have to do that. We have to pursue the economically illiterate
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, there's no way to fix this economy without an economic interference. And I think
Probably.
you're a big part of that.
Right. No, the fix is not going to be easy because you have basically one of two options, in my opinion. Number one, you rip the Band-Aid off and it's going to sting and hurt really, really bad. You might even bleed. But that's going to get you to the quickest healing. Or you take it easy and you let the wound slowly heal, which might take longer. I don't know if that's a really good, perfect analogy, but I think it makes, people would understand it well enough. And that the idea being, the more rough it is, potentially the quicker, but it's also going to be, again, more rough in the short term. Or you can take it slower and dial things back, which would be less painful. However, the problem is, if you're moving at a level of increments that allow you to avoid the pain, then there's a very high risk that somebody will just undo it and start turning around and going the other direction, right? And so those are your two choices, I would say. But as far as like, I think it's a multifaceted effort. So, and it depends on the skill set of somebody. So, remember the PragerU videos where like somebody would sit there and they would be talking, and then all of a sudden you would see like this animation as they're talking in the background. And like if somebody was good at at developing those, they should develop those. Other people will be lecturers, right? They will write books. Some of those books will be simple, some of those books will be complex. And I think the way that you reach the American people is it has to be multifaceted. You have to find people that can operate in different spaces and then get them there operating in those different spaces. For some
Yeah.
people, a complex conversation will work just fine. For many, it will not. They might need, a very simple PragerU like video that explains something in 5 minutes, like a very, just a small concept in 5 minutes so they can go, oh, okay, I
I
understand that.
agree.
So if I could draw, and we talked about this earlier, if I could draw, if I could do any kind of animation, I would absolutely do those. But I have absolutely zero skills. We talked about this before the show, that I have zero art skills of any kind whatsoever. So it would take me a year to make one 5-minute video. So,
No, go ahead and make it.
well, I'll see you next year when I finally get that one 5-minute video made. Yeah, and I'm only talking about like animation, right? Like if I could make a 5-minute video where I'm just discussing something in a small bite size, you know, level that's easy to understand. Like that in itself is not, for me, would not be very difficult. It's just adding some animation so that it catches people's attention and it effectively distracts them from other things that are vying for their attention. So, but yeah, that's where I was, or that's where I am with that. You know, I think ultimately, you know, ripping the Band-Aid off is probably going to be the the necessary goal. I think I saw a tweet a while back where someone was like, "Yeah, Elon Musk's plan, you know, if it really went through, it would effectively cripple the economy for a short term, and then it could be built back up." And he said something like, "Yeah, that's about right." And it is true. Whether or not we have the stomach for, you know, a tumultuous time, I don't know. Probably not.
Hmm. How can people follow you?
So I'm on Twitter way too much. You can go there and look up Liberty Dad Pod. And then if you want to follow my Rumble channel or my YouTube channel, you can go to rumble.libertydad.com or youtube.libertydad.com. So you can follow me in any one of those places, and you'll pretty much find pretty much all of my content in one of those three places.
Okay, fantastic.
What you got next, sir?
Uh, I was just trying to help people got to follow you in abstract art.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
I was trying to get you to be followed.
Oh, gotcha. I follow you now. I get you.